John, the 10th chapter. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. This is the good news, the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Grace and peace to you from God our Creator and from our risen Christ. Amen. If it hasn't been apparent throughout the liturgy, this morning we are celebrating Good Shepherd Sunday. Maybe you've never heard of it before, and that's totally okay. It does come up every single year, like 3 weeks after Easter. There's this Good Shepherd discourse in the Gospel of John, specifically the 10th chapter. And every year we do a little portion from it. And this year we do this middle portion. And this long address follows and is actually a narrative extension of another story from the previous chapter. It's a story of the healing of a man born blind by Jesus. And one of the themes of the story that comes out is that in light of the failure and spiritual blindness of religious authorities who condemn the healing of a man sightless from birth, Jesus comes in, as he often does, as this counterexample, picking up a theme that runs throughout the Old Testament of God's good shepherds contrasted with leaders who shirk their responsibilities and fall short of caring for God's people. And so, as I said, this year we have this middle portion of the story. And there's so many dimensions of this passage to focus on, but one in particular grabs my attention at this particular time when good shepherds in our shared communal and societal life seem painfully scarce. And Jesus' promises are so desperately needed, while also simultaneously may be received with some skepticism by people who are worn out by the pandemic, the injustice, and anxiety. In the previous section before we read today, Jesus contrasts the Good Shepherd with bandits and thieves, whereas in this morning we hear a story of Jesus contrasting the Good Shepherd with hired hands. Hired hands, it turns out, aren't out to destroy the sheep like those bandits and thieves were. Instead, they're also not committed to, they're not committed enough to risk their lives for this flock. They are pretenders, in it for the cash rather than out of genuine care. And they have a legitimate and important job to do. I don't think anybody would discredit that. But instead, they do it for themselves with little regard to those entrusted to their care. I think we have a lot of hired hands today as well. That is, both people and institutions with legitimate and important roles to play who seem to have little to no regard for those they are called to serve. I'll name just 3. The first is a marketing-saturated world intent on creating in us a sense of lack that drives mindless consumption. Marketing has a role to play in a functioning economy, but as Johann Sachs demonstrates in his insightful book, Winning the Story Wars, he says in the previous century, marketing has been less about sharing information and more about creating a sense of inadequacy that drives us to address real needs through consumer consumption and retail therapy. A second hired hand is the recent rise and now omnipresence, if not dominance, of social media. Again, a means of staying connected while we can't be together is really important. I think this year has reminded us of that as we have been able to stay as connected as possible through Facebook and through other social media platforms when we can't be together. And we still use social media as a way to live stream worship so that we can stay connected online on Sundays. But it doesn't just stop there. We also stay connected with friends all over the world, people who we maybe went to grade school with or college, people maybe we know from other walks of life. We have a unique opportunity through social media to stay connected. But at the end of the day, the dominant value for social media corporations is not altruistic, but monetary. And their profits are completely tied to how much time we spend on their sites, which has bred the sophisticated content algorithms designed to identify your proclivities and amplify them, leading you down a deeper and steeper curve of content tailored towards keeping you staring at a screen. In addition to all that, the necessities of likes or followers as the primary valuation of content leads to an incessant need for external affirmation and a result of self-absorption and insecurity. I know that whenever I post original content, one of the first things I do is see how many likes or comments it has. And really, the hired hands of social media and marketing have merged together to create this dangerous, potentially dangerous monster. I think about it anytime I Google something online, or if I hop on an online store like Amazon, as soon as I start looking at something or Googling something and hop back over to Facebook, the ads for that are immediately flooded for those particular things. This was really true when we started making like a wish list for Emmett on Amazon. Next thing I know, my Facebook feed was flooded with ads for strollers and car seats and pacifiers, things that I really didn't care to see at the time. Or even more so, a couple of months ago, I looked up building plans for a house in Bridgeland because there was a couple from the church who are building there, and I wanted to see their house and see the neighborhood. And this was months ago, but still to this day, every time I get on Facebook, I have advertisements encouraging me to move to Bridgeland. And then there's this other dangerous component of anytime Bree and I have a conversation and we start talking about going on a trip, magically then our Facebook feed and Google is flooded with advertisements for hotel stays and Airbnbs and restaurants in those particular towns. It's this reminder that these advertisers, these social media people are always listening, always watching, and eagerly waiting to remind you that you need more, or that you're not enough. The third hired hand I want to bring up is we live at a time of a polarized and hyper-partisan politics of division. And I think a Democratic-Republican government is a good thing. I think it's one of God's chief gifts to us. It's derived from the Greek word polis, which means people. And it should be this unbelievable agent meant to care for all of God's people. But in recent years, the emphasis is increasingly on inviting you to define who and what you are against more so than who or what you are for, which fosters this negative political identity of opposition, which then easily leads us to this place of hate and maybe even violence. Again, I'll go back to social media as an example. The previous presidency from like 2016 to 2020, I noticed on my social media feed that I would see this increased traffic of anti-Republican Party hate speech. And it was from people who, prior to that, I would never see posts from them. And then after this last election in November, it's almost flipped upside down, where now I see this drastic increase of anti-Democratic Party hate speech, again, from people who I normally never see posts from. There's a documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, which actually goes into why this is, and it's not really important for us. But we're flooded with negativity when it comes to politics. It's almost impossible to avoid. And what all three of these hired hands, marketing, social media, and politics, what they all have in common is the emphasis on self above all others. And the false narrative of scarcity, insecurity, and fear they perpetuate. The messaging throughout all of them is consistent. You do not have enough, you are not enough, You should be afraid. Your image is everything. And really, beneath all these various messages is a single and constant demand to justify yourself, justify your worth, justify your persons, justify your very existence. Which I know can sound alarmist, but when I think about the spiking rates of anxiety, depression, and hopelessness, particularly among the emerging generation, I feel like we are beset by hired hands, eager to have sheep and followers, but ready to abandon them in a heartbeat. Where in contrast, Jesus offers himself as the Good Shepherd. And the proof of his fidelity is simply this, that Jesus is willing to lay down his life on behalf of the sheep. In fact, as Jesus says it, sacrificial love is his purpose, the source of his power, and his enduring example for followers. We celebrate this season of Easter as the triumph of sacrificial love, embodied by God the Son and validated by God the Father in the resurrection. But it's so easy to overlook that Easter isn't a past tense, once and done reality, but rather that God the Spirit continues to be at work, drawing us into lives oriented to, permeated by, and sustained through the same sacrificial love. This is why we commune every week. It's not meant to replicate some historical event that happened over 2,000 years ago, but instead to be reminded that God is still alive and active and at work in us today. And so I want to offer you an invitation. I'm not sure I'm actually allowed to, but I'm going to offer it to you nonetheless. I want to invite you into this community of the Good Shepherd to receive Jesus' promise of presence and protection, and to allow ourselves to be empowered and propelled by that promise to offer a different identity to those around us. For as followers of Christ, we are sent out to offer a different message and distinct and life-giving identity, to remind people that you are enough. You are more than enough for yourself, and you have plenty to share with others. That you are beloved of God. That you need not fear, for the Good Shepherd who laid down his life and took it back up again is with you and for you, always and forever. Amen.